Welcome to Flipping the Table. In this episode, Michael has a conversation with Maureen McGui, the CEO of Ventura County's Farm Bureau, following a tour she led with two local farmers for engineering students from CalPolySLO San Obispo, who are inventing technologies to keep water cool for farm workers in increasingly hot fields. The conversation evolved into a deeper conversation about the challenge of solving problems when biases due to polarization get in the way. Enjoy the show.
Hello. As you may have heard in two previous episodes, Roots of Change and our allied teams from the Public Health Institute are working with several community-based organizations in Ventura County on the Achieving Resilient Communities Project, otherwise known as the ARC project. Our mission is to develop practices that will better protect farm workers from heat stress and heat illness, a serious risk due to climate change. One of those organizations with which we work is the local chapter of the Farm Bureau. Today, I talk with Maureen McGui, who became the CEO of that organization in January of this year. She is a key member of the ARC Project's Ag Brain Trust, which is composed of local agriculture leaders and which is focused on actions farming operations can implement to protect their workers. Maureen is the third Ventura Farm Bureau CEO that I've worked with over the last 20 years. And like her predecessors, she continues the tradition of open mind and heart with an impressive willingness to innovate in ways not often seen by other regions of the state and nation. Maureen was born in Idaho, where she studied German and business at Idaho State University before moving to New York City to get a Master of International Affairs at the New School. Her innate problem-solving skills led her to the Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico, and then somewhat remarkably into agriculture, where she developed and implemented an H-2A foreign temporary visa program for a farm labor contracting company. From there, she joined Good Farms, a founding member of the Equitable Food Initiative, which is dedicated to transparent supply chains and good working conditions. And there she managed field production and special projects. To me, Maureen represents the future of what I would call mainstream production agriculture. She sees the system challenges, is not afraid to engage critics, and as you will see, she is committed to continuous learning and honing skills around positive human dynamics. In short, Maureen is emotionally intelligent, which is critical in a time when polarization impedes the ability to deal with our many complex challenges in creating a truly sustainable food system. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Maureen McGui, it's great to be with you here in Ventura County at the Ventura County Farm Bureau headquarters on a beautiful fall day. What is it, November 4th?
Yeah.
2022. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for coming down and enjoying a beautiful, perfect fall day here in Ventura County.
Yes, it was. You know, before we jump in, I'll just give a little more context. I came down to meet with you and a group of Cal Poly engineering students to tour some farms. That you led us on a farm tour and introduced us some farms and showed us some equipment. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's why I'm here, because it's part of the Achieving Resilient Communities Project, which a year and a half ago I was here talking to your predecessor, John Christ, about the project. We're going to check in on that project, and we're going to talk about other things too. But before we get to all that, love to hear your origin story, because I found it so fascinating. I think our listeners would too. So how did you end up here in this job as the CEO of the Ventura County Farm Bureau, the most progressive and smart farm bureau in the country?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I luckily grew up in Idaho, and so I had a great experience, with rural environment. I grew up in an agricultural region, but I never considered working in agriculture. I moved around a lot. I studied in New York City at the New School. I worked at a big engineering firm in New Mexico. And then I got an opportunity kind of out of the blue to come and work in Oxnard at a farm labor contractor. And it was a really big opportunity for me to advance in my career from a junior project manager into running an entire district. And so I couldn't say no. And that was my first foray into agriculture, people management, and business.
Tell people what a farm labor contractor does.
Yeah, so farm labor contractors really handle the labor portion. So a typical grower, packer, shipper would manage the land, grow the crops, harvest the crops, put them into boxes, and sell them directly to a customer. But there's also an agricultural model that splits all of those up, where you have a grower who then has a labor contractor that brings in crews to harvest. And then those boxes might go to a packing shed, who then sells to a distributor. So in my first entry into agriculture, I was really focused just on the labor piece. Mm-hmm. And while working there, I was exposed to lots of different commodities: celery, lettuce, herbs, strawberries. And after being there for a while, I had an opportunity to work for a client, which was Good Farms. Mm-hmm. And at the time was Andrew and Williamson Fresh Produce. Mm-hmm. So when I started there, it was in the process of getting an Equitable Food Initiative certification, which is the first certification for that program.
Yeah, and talk about that, because that was a groundbreaking program where farm labor got together with the growers to do something good.
Yeah, and what was great is the people who came together and conceptualized the Equitable Food Initiative were from all across the supply chain. So you had retailers like Costco and Bon Appetit, which is a big catering company for universities, coming to
high-tech companies. They also do high-tech.
Yes, exactly. And coming together with labor advocates like UFW, and then also growers who are interested in developing a farm worker first management system. And since in my previous project management life, I had all this experience with process management, it was really cool to work on designing a process that really put the farm worker in the decision-making seat, which is something that has already permeated manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And I think as a huge opportunity to be implemented in agriculture. And that was kind of one of the first groups that said, here's not only standards, but a management system that can help guide you in implementing those kinds of concepts.
Human-centered design.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's what we would say in public health or in international development. That's the phraseology we would use, human-centered design, and that's for a system, a process. So this is interesting. I mean, that kind of flips things on its head, really, from the old-style agriculture by putting the farm worker in the decision-making. So explain, give an example of what that might mean, how that might change things.
Yeah, so first I would challenge that there's any situation where farm workers aren't totally involved in the decisions. It's just whether they're being acknowledged or not. They're making thousands of micro decisions every day. Are they going to fully wash their hands? Are they going to properly do their ergonomic stretches? They do have agency in whatever system they're in. And the Equitable Food Initiative and Good Farms, even outside of that framework, was really acknowledging the professionalism of the farm worker and treating it itself as a professional career. So an example, really practical example of that is I had an organic field that did not have very high productivity at the time due to some weather conditions, and it was muddy. And normally you would just sort of say, you need to harvest this. And then the harvesters might say, well, you need to pay me more because I'm not making enough on piece rate. And you'd get into a wage negotiation. Well, and not that that's bad, but it's not the full picture. So under this framework, I sat down, I talked about the impact of all of the different influences that were creating the productivity problem, and we went over the financials so that they could see, if we harvest this much, then we'll break even. If we harvest this much more, then we'll make money and we can all share in those profits. And so giving them the extra context in order to guide their thinking around why they were being asked to do something really put them in the driver's seat of saying, you know what, I want to meet these productivity goals, and I understand why this is being paid at the rate that it's being paid.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So anyway, you did that for how long?
So I was at Good Farms a little over 6 years. I was directly managing a strawberry farm for the first 2. Then for about 2 years, I worked launching a cold press juice program, which was really interesting. It was a project that was conceptualized after analyzing food waste in the company and trying to look at ways in which to combat that. And then I spent about 4 years in project management, special projects all over Mexico and California, putting in new conveyor belts or looking at blueberry packing lines, just anything that...
Solving problems.
Yeah, solving problems, building teams, helping teams get the resources they need within the structure of the organization.
Interesting. So how did Farm Bureau find out about you?
Yeah, so during COVID, I joined the Farm Worker Health Collaborative that you're also on with John Chris, my predecessor, and we worked on really interesting, critical issues like getting vaccinations to the farms in appropriately managed formats so that farm workers could take advantage of vaccines. And so working on that, I worked at 3 different on-farm vaccination clinics and getting involved in that program, along with the work that was being done, through my experience working at a company like Good Farms. I was like, hey, maybe I want to get into this, advocacy work full time. This is such a satisfying part of my job. Is there an opportunity to make it a higher percentage of what I do? And so when John announced his retirement, I was kind of hemming and hawing. Do I want to? Do I not want to? And I ended up actually putting in my application the day after it closed.
Oh, wow.
So it was really lucky that they let me join in the interview process.
Wow. Well, as I have said to the team that I'm working with on the Achieving Resilient Communities project with you, you haven't been there, but I've said, wow, Maureen is a godsend because you in the mold really, but even more in touch with the things that are current now than the previous leaders because they lived in a different time. John was a huge environmentalist and had a long history of writing about the environment. And he came into this job and built relations and did a lot of good stuff. And before that was Rex Laird, who was in his time extremely forward-thinking. And on the surface, you'd think he was a very conservative guy who didn't have that much of an open mind if you didn't know him. And then you listen to the guy and you're like, Jesus, that guy is like really open, and he was part of phenomenal things here in Ventura County, just like John. And now you're here and you are even more in touch with what is now. So it's very exciting to have you as part of this project. So why don't you, people who have listened to the podcast steadily will, over the last couple of years, will have heard 2 conversations I had with John and then with Maricela Morales, who runs the Cause, which is the other organization that's a key partner in this project, which is a farm worker and labor advocacy group. But why don't you just talk a little bit about the project that we focused on today, the piece that we focused on today, because there are many pieces to the Achieving Resilient Communities project, but this one is very specific.
Yeah. So, one of the challenges that we have in specialty crops that require a lot of labor is in attracting innovators to our problems. And so the ARC group, under your leadership, I thought was really genius in connecting with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in proposing to their engineering students one of the technologically based solutions that we're looking for, which is to develop a water cooling system that could be deployed in the field for harvesters, meaning it needs to be independent, mobile. It needs to integrate into the food safety and personnel safety environment. It can't weigh more than 50 pounds. It has to have a capacity of a certain amount of water.
Has to keep the temperature right.
And then keep the temperature at a certain amount, because the thinking is if you're working in a hot environment, you can drink that cool water to bring your core body temperature down and prevent heat stress. And I was really excited today to connect with students who are going to become engineers.
Yeah, they're seniors.
Right.
That's their senior project.
Yeah, on the project, but then also to see them thinking about our challenges, because I think we connected with 7 potential future thinkers on agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a rare opportunity to really engage outside of our normal area of influence.
Yes, and just to give the listeners a little bit more picture of who these 7 seniors from Cal Poly's engineering program. First of all, there's 2 teams. You tell people how you had to compete and what happened, because it kind of blew me away.
Yeah, this was really exciting. Alec from the ARC project and myself presented to this group of students, and there were more potential projects for them to pick than student groups available. And we actually got 2 student groups interested in our presentation. We only had 8 minutes. And I think that says a lot, because I got to hear the presentation previously, and they had a laboratory and all this expensive equipment, where you could really play with things as an engineer that you would never have access to. And our offering was like, you can come and tour a field. So it's really exciting that the students were engaged and interested in solving a problem that could affect so many people.
Yeah, it's 2 things came to me. One is the generation that's in school now, and going back even probably to your generation when you were in college, food was becoming an important issue. People started to talk about food, the politics of food, the production systems, the health implications, the climate. So these young people, they're all men, are focused. You could see they were interested in food. And when we were in the fields, they were like, how could we, not waste so much that gets put on the ground when they're harvesting? I mean, they're thinking about it. But also 2 of them came from farm worker families. Mm-hmm. One was from China. So it was a really interesting group. We were looking at some boxes that had Chinese writing, and he was able to translate for us what it said. That was interesting. So just tell people what we did.
Yeah.
The places we went, what we saw, what we talked about.
So we started off in a strawberry field, and this was off-cycle strawberries, meaning that they're planted in a non-traditional time in order to expand the season. And so we were able to see harvesting at a time when there's not normally harvesting.
And that was the Ryder Brothers?
That was at Ryder Brothers.
And Ryder Brothers is a big berry producer, and they're connected to Driscoll's, right?
Yeah, and they're also, I think, on the ARC project with Yesel. Yeah.
Yesel.
So
Barajas.
Yeah,
yes.
we got to take a look at that and kind of engage with the foreperson as well on what their process is like in terms of providing water for the crew.
That's the foreman. The foreperson is I say foreman because people might not know what a foreperson is, but it's this. Yeah.
Foreperson is like the gender neutral.
Gender
version,
neutral. Yeah. Yes. Good. So you're ahead of me there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we went over and looked at cilantro crew. Mm-hmm. And we did a couple of stops because the grower who was at Laubacher Farms, Hank Laubacher Sr., who I was excited to hear their family is at 120 years of farming this year.
Right.
So he had a bunch of innovations he wanted us to see. So we got to see some innovations around planting styles for romaine. Mm-hmm. We got to see their recycling program for drip tape, which is one use only. Mm-hmm. And that's been a challenge. And so I was really happy to see that. And then we ended the tour at a iceberg lettuce and then celery harvesting. Mm-hmm. And our last stop I thought was the best. We arrived just as they were finishing up their lunch break, and the harvest crew was really interested in what this group of students was doing there. They were asking questions.
And they were celery. They were celery harvesters.
Yeah, they were celery harvesters. And so they have a big machine. They're working as a group, and you have a group that's cutting the celery, and then a group that is putting the plastic sleeve on the celery and placing it into the box.
And then another crew that stacks them and puts them on pallets.
Yep.
And that's where we saw the boxes that were going to China.
Oh, great. Yeah. And so we got to go into some row crop vegetables, and you can see the amount of biomass that's left behind. Part of that's because of the way that we like our vegetables to be prepared before they come to market. And part of it is just because we only eat a portion of that type of vegetable. And so the students were really engaged in a conversation around food waste and maybe, using byproduct for other types of offerings for the market. And I thought it was cool that they were going there because they're engineering students. I thought they would be more interested in the machinery. And I, to your point, I think that they were interested also in where their food comes from.
Yeah. Prior to that, at each stop that we went, we were looking at the wagons that are pulled that they use for harvest or the tractors. They were looking for energy sources. How are we going to cool the water? How are we going to power that? They had, at the beginning, a lot of questions about the technology that they were looking at, but it did evolve into this other deeper, longer conversation at the very end about the food waste and the other opportunities around that. So that was a great day. We got a lot of good pictures. So for those who are interested, there'll be pictures available on the Roots of Change website and maybe the ARC website. And then maybe if you want to share some at Farm Bureau, there'll be pictures of this event that you can all see because it was totally cool. I loved it. I had a great time today.
Me too.
Yeah. And during it, and as we were driving from site to site, you and I were in a very interesting conversation about the challenges that both of us face in our world, because the world is, I think everybody would agree, we're living in a polarized world. There are groups on at least two sides of the spectrum around politics who are having a harder and harder time listening to each other and talking. And so our jobs is to find middle ground with people so that we can actually solve problems. And that is a challenge. So we were talking about how would you actually get conversations going again? How would you, when you think about it, what comes up for you?
Yeah, I think there's an important role for organizations that are focused on creating space for conversation. And I do see the Farm Bureau as part of that because ultimately it doesn't matter what your political view is, you have to eat. And so you can find common ground because our membership is so diverse. We also serve a lot of people in the community that aren't members, right? And so we have to come up with ways to communicate that include organic and conventional, new products and historically grown products, technology and traditional methods. And so I think that there's some opportunity there, but as we get pushed into creating camps, it becomes more and more challenging to create an environment where people are willing to listen to each other. And I think there's a lot of incentives for people to take very extreme positions, and it's difficult to create incentives for people to take open positions or to tolerate inconsistency in perspectives because people are really looking for sound bites. It's hard to have real discourse these days. But I do think the fundamental structure is there. It's just a matter of figuring out what the right issue is to bring everyone to the table and how to continue to keep them engaged throughout the process.
We hope you're enjoying the conversation. If you are, please rate our podcast and offer a review. Your voice will help us grow our listener base, which helps us sustain the funding to share these conversations with the people and organizations shaping a more just and regenerative future. A future in which the food and farm businesses are helping to solve the largest challenges of our time.
When the idea of this project emerged, I said to the team, the ARC team, we should go to Ventura County because Ventura County is a place where there has been innovation. Innovative solutions have come out of this place because you have a intellectually kind of high-powered grower community. You live on the edge of the LA basin where a lot of innovation's happening and you have a big market. You have very high-value crops here, a very specialized and beautiful place. So it's a place where there's been flexibility, and maybe it's the diversity of crops that gives you that. I don't know, because in places where there's only one crop, it's even harder, right? Because you have one way of thinking to grow that crop. So anyway, it was a good place to come, and I thought that labor was a place that we might meet because I had talked to John about the challenges that heat and climate were having both on crops, and that's in the first podcast, but also on the labor, the risk to the farm workers, which you're totally dependent on as an industry. To eat, we need farm workers. So it seemed like those are two good reasons why we're here. The other thing that I want to talk about is this challenge. I see the same challenge in my world. It's like where I live, which is kind of in a way the opposite. You're representing the farming community. I'm often representing those who want to transform agriculture, move it in a certain direction. But I'm also under pressure because we look for the nuance. And I think what you were saying is these problems are complex. There is a ton of nuance. And when you get into these stark places where people are being forced by the media or the context or the political parties into certain positions, it gets really hard to get to the nuance and talk at the level of nuance, which makes it sometimes impossible to solve problems. Untangling the knot of the problem requires the nuance. So I'm always wondering, okay, what is the topic? You brought that up. Is it labor? Is that a place? It seems like it is because you guys were so responsive to COVID, despite some of the criticism you've gotten. I mean, nowhere else did the farming industry respond so fast as Ventura County. And to fires, same situation. We had big problems where I live too, but you have been working on this problem. Is labor a place where we could get a dialogue?
Yeah, for example, the Farm Worker Resource Program.
Mm-hmm. Tell people what that is.
That is a county-sponsored program that is almost like an ombudsman or a dispatcher for all of the resources that are available to farm workers. So a farm worker can call and get service in Spanish or I think 9 native languages that are common in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And they will be directed to anything and everything that they may need. And another aspect that I think doesn't get enough credit is that the Farm Worker Resource Program is deeply connected into the grower community so that if there are challenges, they're able to help with conflict mediation so that everybody wins. So for example, it was very confusing during the pandemic when you had to pay COVID pay and when you didn't. How many hours did you have to pay? Who was eligible? Who wasn't eligible? And even as an employee, understanding whether or not you were eligible. And so farm workers who called into the Farm Worker Resource Program were able to say, hey, I think I didn't get my COVID pay, but I'm not sure. And then the Farm Worker Resource Program was able to connect with the growers and say, hey, could you take a look at this? How do we come to a conclusion so that the farm worker gets, what they're entitled to, but also you get resources and understanding and training on what your requirements are so that this doesn't keep happening again and again. Mm-hmm. Rather than, let's say, they get a violation 6 months later, it gets followed up. Now they got to go into deposition, and there's a settlement, and nobody really wins in that situation.
That's just costly for everybody.
It's costly, and it spreads out the reaction to where they can't actually then implement that change immediately. Mm-hmm. So more people then
suffer.
Mm-hmm. And
it creates animosity, distrust, all kinds of problems.
Unnecessarily.
Right.
When really all that needed to happen is someone needed to call and be like, hey, I think you might misunderstand this rule that's constantly changing. Mm-hmm. And so that's been, for just a small practical example of how the Farm Worker Resource Program served farm workers while also building a more resilient community to challenges like the pandemic. Right.
And your supervisor, former supervisor Bennett, now is an assembly person who took it to the state, and now the program that you started here is spreading across the state, mm-hmm. which is a legacy that this county has had in other areas around pesticide use around schools. Same thing. That's back when I was working here. They passed a law. So there are important things that can happen in a community like this when there's a dialogue. And in both those cases, talk about the people that came together in response. I think it was fires first, the Miracle Group, because we talked about in our previous conversation, but I want to remind listeners what the Miracle Group is and how that formed and what it does.
So the Miracle Group is a group of growers and social justice organizations. For example, CAUSE, it's on the ARC project. My Cop,
another ARC project partner,
right, who specifically works on indigenous issues. Mm-hmm.
For indigenous farm workers,
right?
Yeah.
I believe Líderes Campesinas,
Líderes
which
Campesinas,
is a
yes, is a
farm
partner.
worker women's empowerment and leadership training group.
Yep.
And they come together with farmers to work on projects for the benefit of farm workers and other issues. And so, for example, if there's a wildfire smoke issue for outdoor workers or farm workers, they might come together and say, hey, how do we build a program that both protects farm workers and enables growers to actually take action? How do we interpret these challenges that allows everyone to come together on the issues from our different perspectives? For example, it was determined by the Miracle Group that a lot of the issues that were coming up around wage and hour violations or sexual harassment or discrimination were probably the root cause was in poor training for frontline supervisors. In any other industry, if you were a supervisor over 30 people, you would have a lot of training, a lot of support, and in agriculture, you are really out there in the field on your own. We really underestimate the power of the frontline supervisor. And the Miracle Group came together and developed a 2-year training program that's completely free to the supervisor, that is now grant supported, and eventually I think was folded into the college curriculum.
Yeah, Ventura College.
Yeah, for Ventura College. And that's done in Spanish for frontline supervisors, and as I said, it is free. And the theory is that if the supervisor gets conflict management skills and HR training and has a knowledge of what the rules and regulations are around safe work environments, personnel safety, and wage and hour rules, then they will probably nip in the bud the most common labor violations in the field.
That's another innovation that could spread all over the state of California. It just needs to get out there. So what we just actually described is that there are some conversations going on, and there could be more. And the question is, what would those fundamental conversations be? That would be interesting to think about. I don't even know if I have the answers now. But when you can get a group of people to sit down and talk and be flexible of mind, not be influenced by the larger cultural polarization right now, if you can break people out of that and give them a safe space to experiment, to think out of the box, to put aside their actually, you have the most incredible poster over your desk. Tell people about that poster, because this is the point I want to get to.
Yeah, I think you're talking about, I have a infographic of 155 cognitive biases.
Right.
So there's a brain in the middle, and then it's surrounded by descriptions of all of these different ways in which we may receive the same data, but come out with a different interpretation because of where we grew up, or natural human ways of interpreting information, or what did we say last week that we think we have to stick by this week, even though we have new information. And I always try to take a look at that and catch myself as much as is actually possible in, how am I following into the Dunning-Kruger effect, for example.
Yeah, so it's really important to find a space where you can have a poster like that on the wall, and everybody can say, oh yeah, that exists, and I'm part of it because I'm a human being. I do it too. And then open themselves to not be afraid to hear something different or to say something different, Because what I have learned over the years is that you have to get people to talk to actually change the cognitive pathways in their brain. If they don't say it differently, the mind won't capture it and change the way they think about it. It's like writing. I do the same when I'm writing. I'm trying to reshape the way I think by writing. And it's a really important thing. And we need more of those conversations in our day and age, because we are in deep trouble because we're so polarized. No one believes anything anymore, except for their own radio station or commentator or politician.
Right. Yeah, and it's the echo chamber, right? If you only hear things that confirm your, view of the world, then you become less and less and less capable of seeing someone else's perspective.
Yeah, it reminds me. Actually, it's funny. The other day, I was thinking. So, I'm about to turn 65, and I'm like, wow, I'm getting older, and I'm worrying about social isolation and what's that going to do to my brain? Because I see it in older folks sometimes. Their world gets smaller and smaller, so their thinking and their frame about what is good and bad gets smaller and smaller. I can see how that happens.
Yeah, I think that happens.
It doesn't have to happen.
It doesn't have to happen, but I do think that it's not only something that happens to people as they get older. I think that we are very incentivized to filter information because we have such complex lives. So if you want to a shortcut, then you just interpret it through your point of view, and it's much easier. It's actually really hard work to consider something that you would not normally have considered, and then also not have a reaction that then chills the other person's reaction. So if someone says to me, hey, Maureen, I think we should take all of the agricultural land and rewild it, and my reaction is so extreme that they can never talk to me again, well, I've lost the opportunity to even look for some sort of compromise or vision around maybe a very specific strip of land with ecological importance, right? And on the other side, if someone says, hey, you know what, I think we should pave over all of the farmland because we need
more housing.
We need more, whatever, high-end condos. If I just scoff at their idea and they may never come to me again, and maybe they would have been the person that got that farm worker housing built on that one specific spot. So it's hard, it's challenging, and I have empathy for people who are saying, you know what, that's not really my area. But man, I would love to build more skills on how to get people to have those tough conversations with an open mind.
Yeah, it would, you wish we had leaders who were calling for that. But I don't see it anywhere. I don't see leaders actually trying to sit people down and get them to do it. I've often thought, wouldn't it be great if we had, I don't think you get elected president or governor or senator by doing that because you need your party. So you're going to play with your party. So it's probably not going to come from the politicians. It's going to come from the social networks, the social innovators. It's going to come from companies that want to think out of the box. It's going to come from people like you who are running institutions that have the job of actually integrating with the community in order to serve your folks. But I think what I'm hearing from you is that the future of agriculture is dependent upon its ability to build these networks of collaboration around solving problems. Yeah,
and I think that's one of the benefits of the Farm Bureau specifically is because we are such a well-established institution. The Farm Bureau of Ventura County was founded in 1914. I might not always get it right, but people can draw on a long history of hopefully net positive successes for the long-term sustainability of agriculture to say, you know what, maybe I don't agree with Maureen on this one specific thing, but there's these 20 other things that I think are going okay. And so having a little bit of flexibility and not being 100% aligned, I think can help build some of that infrastructure.
Well, you have to have many balls in the air at one time. You're working on water. You're working on ag land preservation. You're working on pesticides. You're working on air quality. You're working on labor. You're probably on taxes. You're probably working on a lot of different things. Am I right?
Yeah. And trying to also attract people to the industry while simultaneously speaking often about the challenges, right? So taking all of those challenges and trying to turn them into opportunities.
Yeah, so that's interesting. That's an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur does that. They see the challenges as opportunities. I guess what I'm moved to say now from listening to this is that a lot of people are critical of agriculture because they see it as the source of so many problems. But what they don't realize, and I'm thinking more here of consumers or the average person in America, they like the idea of farmers, but they will often see farmers as a problem what they don't realize is that some of the choices they're making at the market, some of the choices they're making in their lives about what they want are actually connected to why agriculture is the way it is. I mean, the agriculture has to be responsive to market signals. It also has this its biggest problem in my mind is that there's downward price pressure always. So it's not like, I buy an Apple phone probably every 2 or 3 years. I buy a new phone because I want to upgrade. I look at the price, but I pay it, and I pay it every time, and I'm paying more and more. These things are over $1,000 now, I think. Mm-hmm. And when I first bought them, they were expensive then, but now it's crazy. But I don't complain about it because I value it in a certain way, and but if we don't pay for food, we don't eat. People don't realize what it costs to take care of the land. It's very expensive and labor intensive. And so I was talking with Hank today as we were touring his fields, and he was talking about, remember how he talked about the price of lettuce? What is it now as a case?
Yeah, it was like $85 dollars a case for romaine
lettuce.
Yeah.
Which is insane. It used to be like $10, $12.
And that's a temporary situation.
Right. But he said to me later, he doesn't see any way it's going to go back to single digits anymore. It's just the world, there's so much demand, there's so many problems in the supply chains and droughts and all the things that are going on. We looked at a lot of disease that's going on because the temperature's rising. Food is going to be expensive, more and more expensive.
Food is going to be expensive, and I think your note about responding to markets is important. A lot of agricultural investments like orchards are gambles for, 40 years in the future. And then you have someone who can be really agile like Hank Laubacher, who, his crop's going to be done in 12 weeks. And so you have a lot of different pressures on different part of agriculture, but all of them are trying to serve a customer. And in my view, we need more support in terms of specialty crops because we're not
When you say support, what do you mean?
I think, for example, everybody knows they need to eat more fruits and vegetables. We don't even make enough fruits and vegetables for everyone to eat the amount that they should be eating.
Which is, to tell people, you said it over lunch. It was good.
So we are instructed, right, by the USDA or whoever, to eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And I think the last time I read the stat, we grow 2.7 servings. Mm-hmm. So we don't have enough food for everyone to get what they need in terms of fruits and vegetables. That's why I get challenged a little bit when we're talking about market pressures that are putting additional restrictions on growers. So, for example, everyone needs to go to organic or everyone needs to be regenerative when we have food deserts where you can't buy celery or romaine. And, I think...
And so you're saying to go organic or go regenerative, it's going to cost more. So how are we going to feed people that need to get access to those things?
We can't even feed the people we have. Part of that's food culture, right, which gets down to what are people choosing to buy, because we grow the amount that we sell, ideally. And when we don't, then the prices are really low, and then people buy a lot more because the prices are low, right? Everyone sees that. You're going to buy a lot more strawberries when the price is low. Maybe that doesn't affect how much lettuce you buy because you just buy the same head of lettuce every week, or maybe you don't buy any lettuce. So when I say that we need to support specialty crops more, I think we need every type of support you can think of. So customers need to be more interested in buying fruits and vegetables. Government agencies need to make it easier for people to choose to grow specialty crops.
Yeah, that Midwest, they can't do it.
Right.
They lose subsidies if they do it, right?
Exactly. I think we also need to recognize situations like here in Ventura County, we can grow a lot of different really valuable fruits and vegetables, and we may not have the groundwater for it.
Right.
And so supporting specialty crops to feed the nation, right? Ventura County produces more than 14 billion servings of fruits and vegetables. We might need state water. Mm-hmm. We might need the community to come together in all of California to build infrastructure to make sure that areas that are really significant in terms of food safety, food equity, getting food to food deserts, includes these high value specialty crops that are high value because they're really hard to bring to market.
Yeah. So the whole issue of water is a big one. We talked a lot about water today. One of the things that you talked about I thought was really fascinating was this project. I think it's Ryder's doing down in Baja, where they're extracting the salt, but not from the ocean, but from brackish water. It takes less energy, less salt to take out. And you said that could be a solution for California. I thought never heard that before. Maybe I just hadn't done enough homework. That seemed like a very doable thing, potentially. There's a lot of brackish water at the mouth of the Sacramento, at the mouth of other rivers. So is there more you could say on that?
Yeah, brackish water treatment, the engineering is there. The question is really a political question because it's very expensive, although less expensive than ocean water desalination. And there's an environmental question. So every community that's considering brackish water needs to look at what that impact is going to be on their ecology, because
on their wetlands.
On their wetlands, and then also where the discharge is going to go, which is the very high concentration of salty water that comes from any type of desalination program. And so that's a kind of a community specific item. Here in Ventura County, we're very, very lucky to have an incredible basin for storage. We can store a lot of groundwater, but we have historically overdrafted the basin. So we've used more water over the last 150 years irrigating our crops than the water that has gone back into the basin.
Well, that's the same problem everywhere in the state.
Right. And so the result of that here is that we're drawing salt water into the basin.
From the ocean.
So specifically for our community, putting a brackish water treatment plant in a specific area could draw that fresh water back toward the ocean and process out that brackish water in a way that improves water quality for environmental users like the fish in the river, and for agricultural and municipal users. So people growing crops, and then also people who rely on the groundwater for their drinking water.
So that'll be interesting to watch over the next how many
20 years.
20 years. It's going to be a long-term solution.
It's a long-term.
We're going to have to store more water. We're going to have to capture more water. We're going to have to make the soil better at holding water. We have so many different solutions. There's no silver bullet, I don't think. I mean, I'm not one who believes in silver bullets. Maybe you do. I don't believe in silver bullets. I believe that you have to do, because it's just like with complex problems, you need to get to the nuance, and it's usually you have to do a lot of things at once to solve really complex problems. It's not one solution. So I would say probably on water, we're going to have to do a lot of different things.
We're going to have to do a lot of things, and when you go through the list of the things that we have to do, it almost seems impossible. But we've done it before. We have already solved similar challenges, like with the State Water Project. We have a long-term water sustainability plan here in Ventura County, and if all the projects happened, there's 25 plus projects. If they all happened, they were all funded. We got over the political hurdles. We are very close to sustainable yield without ramp downs or cutbacks for municipalities or growers. If you add water conservation and innovation between now and 30 years from now, hopefully we get there. And for me, I just have to move forward with this idea that it's possible, because what is the alternative?
Right.
We have to keep eating. All of us need water to live. And so if we aggressively look for opportunities to implement best management practices in terms of conservation, while simultaneously working on new water infrastructure, that's the only path forward.
Yeah.
So we should walk it.
That's right. All the problems that agriculture is facing, that the society's facing, you can't walk away from them. You have to deal with them. And that's what you're saying. And that's the kind of person you are. We started with your path to here, and you're a problem solver. So it's good that you're in this seat here in Ventura County. I'm grateful that you're here. And I know that the county is grateful you're here, and they're going to be even more grateful as the years go by. So having said that, thank you for your time, Maureen. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I'll see you soon, I know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening, and thank you to our sponsors, the Ladybug Foundation, Dan and Quincy Imhoff, Beth and Mark Wyatt, Cindy Daniel, and Doug Lipton. Roots of Change is a program of the Public Health Institute.